Who I am, like where I've been or what I used to be, is not important. Enough to know I've never been anywhere and returned empty-handed. I've made calls, and those calls have been returned, if you know what I mean. I have files people would die for. Maybe some have already. I'm a devotee of dishonorable data. I detect disgrace. I log lies. I bank bad behavior. And I scrutinize scandal. Then and now.
She was one of the first big celebrities of Los Angeles, akin to a movie star, parallel to a movie star.
Aimee Semple McPherson became one of the very first radio evangelists, and she was able to create an enormous church. She was very dramatic, she was very powerful, and she was a female preacher. She had everything going for her.
She brought into her life and the lives of others sex, religion, power, money, props, music, all of the kinds of things that make life interesting and fascinating. And then it was gone. She carried it away because she disappeared. And the world stopped and said, where did she go? And why did she disappear?
The history of evangelical scandal crisscrosses the 20th century like marble fractures in a baptismal font. The disgrace of Jimmy Swaggart's sexual activities and the mail fraud of Jim Baker are just two gaps in a gospel of guilt. But the biggest evangelical scandal of them all took place in the mid-1920s, when Aimee Semple McPherson died and was resurrected.
Greatest headlines of the century. One of the most spectacular evangelists of all time was without a doubt Aimee Semple McPherson. The famous evangelist captured the nation's headlines in 1926 with a mysterious disappearance from an Ocean Park, California beach. Many had seen her go into the water on that day.
The mystery began on the afternoon of May 18th, 1926, when Aimee's secretary, Emma Schaefer, got the Los Angeles Police Department to come to Venice Beach. When the cops arrived, led by Chief of Detectives Herman Klein, Emma's story was that she had come with Aimee to the beach, where Aimee sat down to write a sermon. Emma left to get some juice. When she came back, she thought she saw Aimee in the water, beckoning her to come in. Emma, who was afraid of the water, sat down to read the Bible. When she looked up, Aimee had disappeared beneath the waves.
I was this 15-year-old girl, and suddenly I'm told your mother's drowned. The time that you need a mother more than any other time, perhaps.
And then to have this happen was very upsetting. To me, of course, I was a little child, 13 at the time. We suffered because of that, and it just totally changed our life.
No one had actually seen Aimee drown, so the police were reluctant to declare her dead. In the meantime, a nation mourned.
People would just go to the beach and stand there and act out their grief, or just stand there and look out into the water and look for her body to be washed ashore. Reminiscent of the kinds of things that happen in huge outpourings of public grief, people feeling a kind of solidarity, a need to be someplace that is connected. In this case, the beach.
The nation was shocked at the level of affection that Los Angelinos showed their first homegrown saint. Aimee had started life on a poor farm in Canada. At the age of 17, she married a handsome young missionary, Robert Semple. Together, they made their way to Hong Kong, where Aimee tragically lost her husband to malaria. A month before, daughter Roberta was born. She then returned to America, where she banged her tambourine in the morally suspect theater district of New York. Here she met and married her second husband, grocery clerk Harold McPherson, and had son Rolf. But Aimee loved her calling more than any man. After 5 years of marriage, she and Harold were divorced. Now Aimee, with her 2 children and Mother Kennedy in tow, preached her way across America, all the way to Los Angeles. Here she discovered a natural talent for drawing attention.
Aimee and Los Angeles were made for each other. Here was a city which was in the process of boosting itself into a new identity. Here was a city whose DNA code was entertainment, Hollywood, the sense of the star, the female star, Aimee Semple McPherson.
And behind every star, there is a manager. In Aimee's case, it was her mother, Minnie Kennedy. For many, she became a prime suspect in the unfolding investigation.
Well, the disappearance happened during a time away that had been suggested by Minnie Kennedy, a point that was not lost on some of the people in the temple who did not like Minnie Kennedy and who, to this day, will say that her mother had something to do with the disappearance.
That same evening, while thousands prayed for Aimee to turn up alive, Mother Minnie publicly pronounced her daughter dead.
Normally, you would think that the mother would be a little more upset, emotionally involved, be demanding that the police department keep searching, keep finding my daughter. My curiosity was the fact that she was almost immediately, within a few days, wanting the death certificate. It just struck me as little curious things like that after you've investigated enough cases. It may not prove anything totally, but it's an interesting tidbit. You wonder.
Mrs. Kennedy was always a big factor with Aimee. Always was at her side, always in the financial aspect of the business, was there, and influenced her greatly. Now, when it comes down to the disappearance, I have a hard time believing that she was in on the disappearance.
5 days after Aimee supposedly drowned, there was still no body. 2 people died searching for her, and amid the hysteria, several things bothered the police.
With my experience of having been on LAPD for 30 years, the fact that this body did not show up in the ocean or it wasn't found right away, 99.9% of drownings off the ocean part there are found within a period of 10 days. I think the investigators, when they scoured the ocean front, didn't find anything. And I think by then they were starting to suspect that something was afoot.
Had Aimee been murdered, or was this all a hoax? A publicity stunt staged by a master media manipulator, Aimee herself.
Aimee Semple McPherson had a genius for publicity because Los Angeles was a publicity city, and she could trigger the mechanisms of Los Angeles. There were 5 newspapers, radio stations were just getting their, coming into being and exercising their power, and she knew the theatricality of Los Angeles. She was instinctive with it.
The Canadian-born woman had first come to Los Angeles in 1918 with a $10 bill and a tambourine as her sole support. Within 5 short years, she gathered at her side a staunch following of some 40,000 worshipers. Saint or sinner, and the arguments had been plentiful on both sides, Sister Aimee, as she was known to her flock, could do no wrong. An uninhibited evangelist with a strong sense of showmanship and a real flair for publicity, Sister Aimee carefully shepherded her flock with lusty hymns and violent prayer sessions.
But Aimee was more than all show. She organized food drives and reached out to minorities. She gathered a huge following and built the largest Pentecostal church in the world. Here she dramatized her sermons, scripted them, acted in them, composed and performed the music.
Woo! I wanted to holler and sing and shout.
For thousands, it was the best show in town.
Aimee Semple McPherson came with these people, and she understood them instinctively, and they understood her. She was the quintessential immigrant to this city in the late teens and the 1920s. Self-made, self-invented, not from a fancy background, but nevertheless filled with aspiration and hope for a better life here in Southern California.
Well, one of the things that made Aimee different from the typical fundamentalist preacher is they preached against modernism. They preached against what they saw as the immorality of the modern world. And Aimee, of course, was the most modern of all. She seized upon modernism.
Angela's Temple, and myself as pastor of the temple, was the first church in the world to own a radio station. And when those shining silver towers were lifted up above our temple dome and flashed the message east, west, north, and south.
6 days after the disappearance, a ransom note arrived. It said that Aimee was alive. She had been kidnapped. Minnie was asked to pay $500,000 or her daughter would be killed. Instead of rejoicing in the possibility that her daughter was alive, Minnie ignored the note.
Aimee was dead, according to her mom. And she had enjoyed all of the benefits of that. That is, she was in a position now to take over the reins of the organization. So the mom had a real problem. She chose to deal with it by not dealing with it. The problem was that the police were also involved, and it was impossible to keep them out of the loop.
If Detective Klein had any suspicions about Aimee's disappearance, they were certainly reinforced when a lawyer named McKinley and his secretary joined the cast of characters.
McKinley was an attorney in the Los Angeles area, and he had represented bootleggers and other criminal elements. McKinley, who was blind, had claimed that he was visited by two people who were the alleged kidnappers. Actually, he had indicated that they came to his office and that the reason they came there was so that he would not be able to identify him because he was blind. McKinley went to the police and reported the incident.
Detective Klein now paid Minnie a visit. He was surprised to learn that she had been sitting on the ransom note. When confronted, Minnie called it a fake. To check McKinley's story, Klein insisted that Minnie ask the kidnappers for information only Aimee could provide.
I remember one of the questions had to do with Aimee's brother, who had passed away when he was a small child. One of the questions was, who is Wallace?
2 weeks into Sister Aimee's disappearance, lawyer McKinley passed on the kidnappers' responses to Minnie's intimate questions. Included in the envelope was a lock of what was supposedly Aimee's hair.
Regrettably for the mom, the answer came back and the information checked out. Mom had a real dilemma on her hands. She continued to take the road of indifference, but to the prosecutors and the police, it must have seemed that she was part of the jig at this point.
From the police's perspective, something was terribly wrong. Minnie must have known whether Aimee was safe or dead. Why else would she ignore the ransom notes? If Aimee had been kidnapped, she certainly would turn up dead. If she hadn't, she would have to make an appearance now. Detective Klein decided to wait. He didn't have to wait long. At 1 a.m. on June 23, 1926, the late Aimee Semple McPherson walked out of the desert and into Agua Prieta, Mexico. Very much alive, she knocked on the door of a Mexican family. At 4 a.m., she was driven by taxi across the border to a hospital in Douglas, Arizona. A few hours later, Mother Minnie, Aimee's kids, Detective Klein and his son-in-law, Assistant District Attorney Joe Ryan, arrived in Douglas.
I would have done exactly as Klein did. In those days, he got aboard a train. They took the train to Douglas, and they started the investigation there. And Klein brought in the stenographer. It was probably the best piece of police work that he could have done.
What should have happened from the beginning was that somebody, with some sense of where this thing could go, should have sat her down and said, look, I don't care what really happened. I need to know where you want to come out on the other end of this, because here's the road that lies ahead. And you may think that it leads to Damascus, but actually where it goes is the county jail. And if you don't want to go there, and your whole purpose here isn't to martyr yourself, then you got to shut up right now.
According to Klein and Ryan, Minnie may very well have told Aimee to shut up. When the family arrived at Aimee's bedside, Minnie Kennedy, unsmiling, strode across the room, leaned down and whispered into Aimee's ear. Minnie's hat covered Aimee's face, Aimee's hair covered Minnie's mouth. no one ever discovered what those intense few seconds comprised. Klein felt it was the key to the truth.
They made a big thing about my grandmother leaning over and saying something in her ear. They said, "What did you say to her?" What she said was, "Did they abuse you?" The question any mother would have asked.
If Minnie counseled Aimee to keep quiet, Aimee didn't listen. Klein's stenographer took down Aimee's deposition. According to Aimee, the day of her disappearance, Minnie had suggested she take a rest at the beach while she prepared for her evening sermon. She went to Venice Beach with her assistant, Emma Schaefer. Aimee swam, and from the surf, she saw Emma return to the hotel. Aimee came out of the water and was approached by a young couple. They had a sick baby, they said, and wanted Aimee to pray for the child. Aimee walked with them towards the car. On reaching it, there was no baby. A chloroform rag was forced over her face, and Aimee awoke with a headache in a remote house. Her kidnappers and another man said they were in touch with Minnie to negotiate a ransom and release. Days later, the trio moved Aimee to a remote desert shack with a wooden floor. On the morning of June 22nd, all three kidnappers were absent. Aimee managed to slide across the wooden floor and cut her wrist bonds with the sharp edge of a tin can. She ran out into the desert and stumbled for 11 hours in the scorching heat. Late that night, she saw the lights of Agua Prieta, Mexico. Praise the Lord, Sister Aimee was saved.
Now, she showed up under rather strange and unusual circumstances. She claimed to have walked all day through the desert. She had been held in a shack by three characters, two men and a woman, and she'd walked all day through the desert in 120-degree temperatures. Yet Aimee wasn't perspiring, still looked great, just as she always did, and it was kind of hard to swallow.
At no time did she ask for any water, which you would think that someone after all these hours of the day in the desert and the night would have asked for some water. Also, she didn't have any suntan. She made the allegation after she was cornered on that while she put her dress up over her head to protect her, still there would have been indications on the feet and other parts of the body of a sun.
Despite the skeptics, Aimee stuck to her story, and after the initial debriefing, Klein and Ryan allowed Aimee to return home in triumph. Her train was greeted by the biggest crowd L.A. had ever seen.
At least 50,000 people were waiting at the station. 100,000 more people lined the route that she would take from the station back to Angelus Temple, so it was a huge celebration. It was much like a 4th of July picnic with street vendors and hawkers along the way.
All my returns to Los Angeles have been such joyful, happy returns.
Visibly none the worse for wear, although sobbing out a story of being held by a brutal band of kidnappers. Her return to Los Angeles was a triumphant affair that found her loyal followers delirious with joy over her miraculous escape.
That night, the resurrected Protestant Madonna preached to a temple bursting with parishioners. Then she crossed the lane to her radio station and offered millions more a share in her triumph. To all, she told her story, the same story she had told the police and the press.
There she was, a victim of a very serious offense. So the moment she emerged with that story, the other world and this world joined up together. Because if there's anything approaching religious fervor in the United States then and now, it's the legal system.
Before that system could be fully mobilized, it was necessary to determine the circumstances of Aimee's abduction. So the courts convened a grand jury.
It's not unlike a church congregation, so she must have felt just right at home. There you have a bunch of pews with regular folks sitting in them, religious and non-religious, curious and indifferent, who are subpoenaed off the tax rolls just like any jury. So sure enough, in come the people, the investigators and the folks who were out there looking for things. But when Aimee Semple McPherson showed up, they didn't want to know about the crime. They wanted to know about her. Because right to the end, she was bigger than the crime itself. There were jurors putting their hands up, asking about her finances, where she did her makeup, where she got that beautiful dress that they saw that Sunday back in Easter, the year before. People who had obviously been following her in the papers and the like, and that's what they wanted to know. The crime became a kind of secondary thing.
The mood soon changed. Backed by Ryan's and Klein's investigation, District Attorney Asa Keyes argued that Aimee's disappearance was a publicity stunt. How is it that after 11 hours in the desert, she hadn't thirsted for water? I drank 2 glasses, answers Aimee. How does Aimee explain disappearing in a bathing suit and reappearing in new clothes, including a brand new corset? The kidnappers bought the clothes for me, answers Aimee. How come the stockings still had just bought folds in them? Mother Minnie gave them to me at the hospital, answers Aimee.
She'd had old clothes on, and my grandmother had taken all new clothes to put on her, and they took the old clothes and threw them in the trash. Well, that probably was a mistake, because later they said, well, her shoes weren't even worn. And she walked across the desert, and her shoes weren't worn, but they were brand new shoes that my grandmother had brought her. But it was things like that that got twisted.
How is it that police have not found any shack in the Mexican desert with a wooden floor? The kidnappers must have torn it down when I escaped, says Aimee.
They did an extensive search. They went further than the perimeters that would have been allowed if, in fact, she had walked that distance. They went quite a ways over into Mexico and around Douglas there, and there were no cabins or shacks.
The scandal wasn't her disappearance, and the scandal wasn't the 6 weeks she was gone, and it wasn't her return. It began to be reported as scandal when people who went into the desert couldn't find the shack in which she said she had been held. And so they began to suggest that she'd made up a story, that the scenario was not true.
While the grand jury deliberated on the truth of her tale, Aimee hit the airwaves. Her sermons were more fiery than ever, as if to say Sister Aimee was no liar.
But if you will take the word of God as it stands, alive and living and glowing and burning, he's able to raise from the dead. He's able to cast out devils. He's able to open blind eyes. He's able to make the tongue of the dumb man sing. And he's able to save from all sin. Glory be to God.
While the media war continued, the grand jury came to a conclusion.
The grand jury was impaneled to determine if a crime had been committed. That was its first function. Secondly, its job was to determine who did it. In this case, after all the evidence was heard, they determined that there was no crime, and hence there was no reason to determine who committed it. The reason being, they didn't believe Miss McPherson.
It's also a question of whether a man who had disappeared for a few days would have attracted as much attention as that. The fact that she disappeared and that women were still expected to be always visible and always respectable, and that if they were not visible, then God knows what they were doing, quite literally, is still an indication of the transitional period that the 20s was. And of course, the fact that she was a religious leader made it all the more intense.
The press went wild. A second grand jury was convened. This time it was Aimee that was being investigated. No longer the injured party, she was now the defendant. Witnesses came forward who testified that prior to her reappearance, they saw Aimee accompanied by a man. As it turned out, at the same time as Aimee's disappearance, Kenneth Ormiston, a married radio engineer and former employee of the church, had also gone missing. Assistant District Attorney Joe Ryan was young and tenacious. He held on to a theory like a beagle hangs onto a bone. Ryan was convinced Kenneth Ormiston was the key to making the case against Aimee. For 2 years, Ormiston had worked at the temple. Though married, he was separated from his wife, and the affection-starved Aimee developed a close relationship with him. So close that Mother Minnie had fired him.
She did work closely with him. perhaps more closely than she did with many other people, because in these years the radio broadcasts were all live. And so she'd appear at 7 or very early in the morning, and he'd be there, and they'd spend the beginning of the day, and often after the temple services at night, you know, she'd still be talking to Ormiston. So she did spend a great deal of time with him. It appears that he had a jealous wife who had a history of jealousy and complaints that predated his employment. So there were problems in that marriage that didn't make this story any prettier as it unfolded.
Ryan's take on the story was that on the fateful afternoon of May 18, 1926, when her secretary left the beach, Aimee emerged and met not kidnappers, but her lover and ex-employee, Kenneth Ormiston. They fled Los Angeles to Carmel, where they registered as husband and wife. While 2 people died looking for her, while a nation mourned, Aimee was in the arms of a married man.
So back to Ken. He was a radio operator in her church in Los Angeles. His wife had reported him missing. This was quite a coincidence, but people didn't mind that, the fact that they just forgot about him disappearing. Their woman was gone. But when she came back, all of this started to make sense. He had left at the same time that she had gone missing. On the day after Aimee disappeared, May 19th, the day after, he rented a little love nest in Carmel, California. And Ormiston always claimed by affidavit that he admitted, yes, I had a woman down there, but it wasn't our Aimee.
At this time, it was reported that Aimee and Mother Minnie were having terrible fights.
In 1926, the fact that she was having an affair with a married man was a crime by itself. And since then it's been taken off the books, but adultery was looked at very, very seriously, and that's probably the reason she concocted the kidnapping to cover up for it.
Who shall ascend into the hill of the Lord? He that hath clean hands, who hath not lifted up his soul unto pure heart.
Aimee called the allegations a pile of lies. She mobilized her flock, charging a conspiracy by Catholic cops to bring down her Protestant ministry. Aimee's followers also charged that District Attorney Keyes and the LAPD opposed Aimee because she was an effective campaigner against booze, which during Prohibition was a huge source of money for a corrupt department.
You had some officers that thought getting some easy money was a lot easier, and they did it. It probably wasn't until departments did a complete changeover and started investigating officers and incidents like that departments started to clean up their act. But in 1926, there was a lot of officers involved everywhere taking graft.
But there was always a suspicion among people that Keyes was not on the up and up, that he had too close, his ties with the underworld were much too strong, that he may have been selling verdicts, that he was not completely honest. And Keyes was also a very heavy drinker, and this was Prohibition. So you had the leading attorney for the city of Los Angeles pretty blatantly violating the laws of the nation, the laws of the state.
A series of stories now surfaced substantiating Aimee's claims. A man called Waters produced a woman named Weissman, who claimed to be Ormiston's Carmel lover. Weissman looked uncannily like Aimee. She was practically a double. It now looked like poor Aimee was twice a victim, once of the kidnappers and then of a police frame-up. Ryan counterattacked by producing a grocery list from the Carmel love nest that reportedly matched Aimee's handwriting. Incredibly, the grocery list was flushed down a toilet by one of the grand jurors.
The case had such magnitude that even one of the jurors on the grand jury that was investigating it destroyed some of the handwritten evidence for whatever the purpose. I guess she wanted to help Aimee, and she destroyed the evidence. This was a juror on the grand jury.
Blind lawyer McKinley now produced a number of documents which purportedly originated with Aimee's kidnappers. Things were not going well for Aimee's detractors. Ryan and Klein both went down. Ryan demoted and Klein arrested.
There is a rumor that some people were hired to track Klein, who did have a drinking problem. He had apparently been involved in a number of traffic accidents before while he had been drinking. And it appears that he was set up into a staged traffic accident to where the witnesses called the press right away. As I understand, this incident did lead to his retirement.
But Klein's son-in-law, Ryan, wouldn't let the matter rest. Called as a witness in the grand jury hearings, he called Aimee a fake and a hypocrite. One by one, he managed to discredit all of Aimee's alibis, beginning with Aimee's Carmel lookalike, Mrs. Wiseman.
Mrs. Wiseman had previously been committed to an insane asylum in another state for being an habitual liar. Also, during the period of the investigation, she was arrested and convicted of passing bad checks.
Wiseman was not the woman in Carmel after all. Waters, who had found Wiseman for Aimee, committed suicide. McKinley's secretary now admitted that, working for Aimee, she and McKinley fabricated evidence. Before he could testify, McKinley ended up dead by the side of the road when the car he was riding in with 2 other passengers overturned, killing everyone.
Americans take their justice system very seriously. If you scorn it and treat it with abuse as opposed to respect, Americans get their fur up. And there was a lot of fur up. And as a result, all of that artillery that was all greased up and ready to go and fire off against these bad people that had almost taken Aimee Semple McPherson away from Los Angeles and the hearts of America, turned it around and pointed it at her.
Warrants were now issued against Aimee, Minnie, and Ormiston. Ormiston was nowhere to be found. He was moving around the country using a number of aliases. Aimee fell ill and could not be arrested. When Aimee got better, she wasn't put through the humiliation of a formal arrest, but Minnie was arrested and released on bail. Along with Ormiston and Minnie, Aimee was charged with corruption of public morals and conspiracy to manufacture evidence. Although they closed ranks, Mother Minnie and daughter Aimee were no longer close. During the hearing, Minnie clutched a mysterious shoebox that some speculated held evidence that, if needed, would exonerate her and leave Aimee twisting in the wind. Things were looking bad for Aimee, who was tireless in her own defense. Every night she whipped her followers into a frenzy. The devil was trying to undo God's work, she said. She called for fasting, marching, prayer, and song. She called on her followers to help in any way they could. And mysteriously, prosecution evidence, such as the typewriter used to type the ransom letters, disappeared from police vaults.
For evidence to disappear from official police custody would not have been that difficult in 1926. The procedures for booking it in and securing it were not very formal. Anybody could have walked in there, a policeman or a civilian employee or even someone from the press, looked at this item, and while the employees were not paying attention, walked off with it. Not hard at all. So it is conceivable that somebody that was familiar with the property room, if it was in fact placed in police custody, could have gotten to it. Yeah, it wouldn't have been difficult.
Witnesses and evidence were disappearing faster than Aimee on a beach, so it looked like the case against her would be dropped. But a new lead changed everything. Police discovered an unclaimed trunk in a New York hotel and traced it back to Ormiston. It was filled with what appeared to be Aimee's lingerie, leading many to speculate that at the time of her disappearance, she was about to elope with Ormiston. Aimee denied the clothes were hers. The prosecution and the press closed in for the kill.
His mother would come home, shaken by the disbelief, cry a few tears, then wash her face with ice water, put a Bible under her arm and go back into the church and preach a sermon.
She would go home from court and go to the radio and know very well that people were listening, and they'd get her side of the story before the print reporters would go and get theirs all written up.
The media war escalated as the contents of Ormiston's trunk were now made public. It seemed as inexhaustible as a magician's hat, containing, among other things, silk bloomers, a silk brassiere, a lavender nightgown, a salmon chemise, and a black lace shawl. Aimee's followers were livid. The presiding judge received death threats. Still, from Aimee's perspective, things now took a turn for the better. First, Ormiston was found in Pennsylvania and hauled back to L.A., where he testified that the woman in the Carmel love nest was not Aimee. He refused to identify his lover, whom he called Miss X. Then the owner of the Carmel cottage, who might have identified Aimee, died of a sudden heart attack. Finally, a fire at the L.A. Times destroyed their files on Aimee and nothing else. But no one was prepared for what happened next.
There was so much, by this time, irregularities in that grand jury members were charged with tampering with evidence, with destroying evidence. Witnesses had been brought in who told one story, then changed their story. And so the case was falling apart.
And so at the end of the day, you put your office up against this woman with enormous stature, and one of the things you have to ask yourself is, who's going to prevail? And what is this office going to gain by taking down Aimee Semple McPherson? Because there is a public component to it. What is the community going to lose if Aimee Semple McPherson is destroyed by the judicial system? A lot.
After 8 months on the attack, the DA reversed himself and dropped all charges on the grounds that there was no evidence to convict. Many believe that Aimee's high-powered friends put the squeeze on the district attorney's superiors. Others believe it was D.A. Keyes himself who was on the take.
People looked back and began to wonder, and they said, is it possible that the reason that these charges were dropped was because somebody got to Ace Keyes? And if somebody got to Ace Keyes, who was it? Was it Aimee? Was it a friend of Aimee's? Was it somebody just totally unconnected with the case?
And the story is, and I believe it to be true because of this unsavory character the district attorney turned out to be, that he received a lump sum payment of $50,000 from Aimee to drop the whole thing, and he did. Later, this same district attorney ended up in San Quentin for a couple years on a not related charge, but it was fraud. So he was quite capable of accepting a bribe, and I believe that that's probably what happened.
Ormiston took the rap in the press and in his private life, getting an unfavorable divorce settlement as a result of the Carmel escapade. He never complained, never named Aimee in private or in public, and he kept his distance. Aimee declared victory, but it was never the same. She went back to the temple, to the woman she called her precious, faithful mother. They argued terribly, often in public, with many threatening Aimee that she'd set the record straight. During one of these arguments, Aimee broke her mother's nose. They never spoke again, and Aimee fell apart.
She was very, very ill. She had a nervous breakdown. She needed to be secluded. She was very stressed, having come through this disappearance and what followed.
Aimee now seemed a different person, a woman haunted by events that can finally be reconstructed. What happened on May 18, 1926, on Venice Beach in California? A kidnapping? A publicity stunt? Or a momentary surrender to carnal pleasures?
I don't think it was a publicity stunt because she didn't need it. She had the hottest gig in town from one point of view. So what did it need to be reinvented for? I mean, she didn't need the ratings boost. She had a terrific, fabulous thing going that had a kind of electricity to it, as far as I can make out, that is only rivaled by you know, the modern pop show. I mean, you have to go back and see people like Pickford and Garbo when they appeared in public to get a sense of just how electric it was when she appeared.
In retrospect, it seems that Aimee was in love with Ken Ormiston, who had recently separated from his wife. Mother Minnie was adamantly opposed. She fired Ormiston and sent Aimee to the Holy Land. Minnie's strategy didn't work. When Aimee came home, the affair with Ormiston continued, despite Minnie's constant interference. So Aimee decided to call it quits.
Aimee liked Ken, said, let's go up to Carmel into this cottage and have a hell of a time for 5 weeks. I've been a saint here for years, praying and preaching in front of these people. Wind is blowing in my hair. I don't need it. I got a mother bugging me on one side. I got 2 kids. I want to go up in the cottage with you now. And that throws out all the other theories. That's my theory. And I really honestly and truly believe it's the true theory.
But if Aimee just wanted to have an affair with Ormiston, she didn't have to disappear. It seems more plausible that she decided to stage her own death. Aimee the Evangelist would die, while Aimee the woman would live happily ever after with her man. When she disappeared on the beach, Mother Minnie immediately understood. The church had gained a saint, while she had lost a daughter. Then, faced with a lifetime of conjugal happiness, Aimee changed her mind. Her church needed her. The people needed her. She could not turn her back on destiny. Ormiston played along, but Mother Minnie would not cooperate.
I think what happened here was that Aimee Semple McPherson came to her mom one day, who was, after all, her closest advisor and confidant, and told her that the jig was up, and that Aimee Semple McPherson was going to go off and be something else. Who knows what and where, but it doesn't really matter. And Aimee Semple McPherson's best manner of exit, in keeping with her earlier persona, was to die, because that would leave people mournful, but allow Mom to continue the organization.
Minnie understood that having faked her own drowning, Aimee had to stay dead. When Aimee tried to stage a comeback, faking a kidnapper's ransom note, Minnie wouldn't play the game. So Aimee was forced to engineer her own resurrection.
The only thing that didn't get planned out, in my opinion, was what to do if Aimee Semple McPherson changed her mind. Because it's pretty hard to change your mind and come back from the dead, even for Aimee Semple McPherson. It's only been done once. And as far as Aimee Semple McPherson and her followers were concerned, that was a very hard act to follow.
A friend of the church drove her to Arizona, where she told a tale as entertaining as any of her sermons. All would have gone well, except that Detective Klein decided to investigate, and he involved his son-in-law, Assistant District Attorney Joe Ryan.
That's what basically wounded her. I think the sexual indiscretion could have been overcome had it just happened to her and not been involved with deception and fraud.
For the first time, Aimee's version of events became accountable to everyday facts. Forced to expand on her original story, Aimee became enmeshed in a web of lies, all in the name of her higher calling.
You know, human beings have trouble accepting the fact that we all, each of us, contain within ourselves the spirit of our own contradiction. Maybe, I'm not a psychiatrist, maybe deep down she felt unworthy of that power. Maybe deep down she preferred to be a sinner than a saint. It's a big burden to be a saint.
A very big burden. In 1931, she made one last desperate attempt to escape from sainthood when she married a man 11 years her junior.
And along the line, she chose a new husband, her third. For this spouse, she dipped into the ranks of the temple and selected a man known as Pharaoh Hutton. The newlyweds embarked by plane for a European honeymoon.
After 3 years, the Hutton marriage collapsed.
Oh, what are your plans for the future? Well, my plans, as the plans of all of us should be, are in the hands of the Lord, and to continue with my church work, to preach the gospel as long as I am able to. Well,
Her following reduced and her health frail, Aimee soldiered on. She became a shadow of her former self. Despite several facelifts and much good work, the press took less and less interest in her. In 1944, after dedicating a new church, she died of what the coroner called an accidental overdose of sleeping pills. She had been the first evangelist to create that peculiar American mix of religion and entertainment. And the church she founded still has over 1 million followers worldwide. But she was also a woman who yearned not for heavenly, but earthly love. They all died young. Aimee at 54, Ormiston at 41, Ryan at 53. In a sense, they all became players in one of her sermons, a passion play, where the ticket to heaven was earned by self-sacrifice on earth.